Okay, this video is just going to review factoring the difference of two squares and perfect square trinomials. So this is just going to be factoring a difference of two squares and perfect square trinomials. So the first thing we're going to do is turn my pen on. Difference of two squares. Okay, so this is not in your book. This is just you learning how to do it and nailing this concept down, okay? So put your book away and get your, unless you just happen to be watching this video and you're in book 3 or book 4 of Algebra 1 PACE. But you just need to get a piece of paper out and you need to walk through this with me, okay? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to factor c squared minus d squared. So the main thing to remember when you are factoring a difference of two squares is that you are going to have two sets of binomials, okay? So all you're doing is just factoring c squared minus d squared. It's going to be in two sets of binomials, and the only difference between these two sets are their signs. The only difference between these two sets are their signs. So one is a positive and one is a negative. So we're going to take this first one and we're going to say, what is the square root of c squared? So remember, when you're taking the square root of a variable raised to an exponent, you take that exponent and you divide it by your root, which is 2. So 2 divided by 2 equals 1. So the square root of c squared is c to the first. So I'm going to have 2 of these. 2c to the first. One in that binomial, one in that one. Okay, I'm done with that, and I'm going to move on to the next one. The square root of d squared. So it's the same thing. 2 divided by 2, my exponent divided by my root, which equals 1, which is going to give me d to the first. So I'm going to have 2 of those. One in this one and one in this one. That is my answer. Okay, I'll give you a second to finish writing that down. I guess you could pause the video. Okay, so we're going to do another one. 4c squared minus 9d squared. So remember that the binomials are a difference of two squares, and the only difference between them are their signs. Okay, so you should be able to immediately recognize that this is a difference of two squares. There's a negative sign in the middle. 4 is a perfect square. 9 is a perfect square. How do I know that? 2 times 2 equals 4. 3 times 3 equals 9. Your perfect squares should be something that you are able to recognize at this point without really even thinking about it. Multiplication should have been learned years ago. This should just be second nature at this point. If it is a number multiplied by itself, the number it equals is the perfect square. So this row of numbers are your perfect squares. So if you continue on, 5 times 5 equals 25. Now sometimes you have to have a calculator to know if it's a perfect square or not, because I mean, who knows what the multiplication number is of 16 times 16. And I don't know that number off the top of my head. I would have to use a calculator for that. But for these numbers, you should know. Also, when you're dealing with variables, anything raised to the even power is a perfect square. Oh, that's not an even. That's a 6. Because remember, when you take the square root of c squared, you're taking this exponent divided by your root, which gives you c to the first. When you're doing d to the fourth, you're taking your exponent divided by your root, that gives you 2d squared. Okay? So 6 divided by 2 is 3, and so on. If you have a variable and it is raised to an even exponent, it is a perfect square. All right? So now we're going to take 4c squared, and we're going to do the square root of that. So what's the square root of 4? It's 2. So I'm going to have a 2 and a 2. What's the square root of c squared? Is c. So I'm going to have a c and a c. Now you move on to your 9d squared. You're going to take the square root of that. Square root of 9 is 3. So a 3 and a 3. And the square root of d squared is d. So d and d. All right? So you can pause the video and write that down, but that is your final answer. You need to write down all of these steps. Don't write down just the answer. And if you need to pause the video so you can write it down, you can do that. But I don't have to pause. I don't have to wait because y'all are able to pause. So we're going to move on. Again, if you need to pause, just pause the video. I don't know what they're doing downstairs to make all that noise. Okay? So once again, you should immediately recognize that this is a perfect square and this is a perfect square. 4 times 4 is 16. 5 times 5 is 25. So until you're just able to do this without thinking, every time you need to put these in a square root box. All right, so the square root of 16 is the square root of a squared, a, and the square root of b squared. Remember, the only difference between my two binomials in my difference of two squares is my signs. And then we're going to take the square root of 25 c squared d squared. All right, so the square root of 25 and the square root of c squared and the square root of d squared. Okay, I'll do one more of these and then we're going to move on. All right, so how can 1/4 be a perfect square? It's a fraction. How can that be a perfect square? Well, when you're multiplying fractions, you just multiply straight across. 1 times 1 is 1. 2 times 2 is 4. Since this is a number multiplied by itself, this is your perfect square. So when you factor, you're going to do the same process. Square root of x squared. The only difference is your signs. And the square root of 1/4. All right, so we're going to move on to factoring of perfect square binomials, or trinomials, I'm sorry. Perfect square trinomials. So you're given a squared plus 2ab plus b squared. This is factoring perfect square trinomials. All right, so in this, all you have to do is take your first one and your last one and square root it. So a squared equals a, so a, and b squared, the square root of b squared equals b, so b. Remember this sign right here tells me that my signs are the same or that they're different. And this sign right here tells me what those signs are. So they are positive. So you can write your problem like this. These are perfect square trinomials. That means that they look exactly the same. So that way or this way. Either one is correct. So in a difference of two squares, your two binomials look the same except for the sign. In a difference of two squares, the only difference in your binomials are your signs. One is a positive, one is a negative. In your perfect square binomials, or trinomials, perfect square trinomials, then your two binomials are identical. They look exactly the same. And how do you know the difference of two squares versus a perfect square trinomial? Well, this one looks this way, and this one, this is a difference of. You know it's a difference because there's only two of them, and they're separated by a negative sign. All right, so I'm erasing this. We'll do another one. All right, let's do 144x squared y squared plus 24xyz plus z squared. So again, you're only looking at your first one and your last one. You're going to take the square root of 144x squared y squared, and you're going to get 12xy. And then you're going to take the square root of z. You're going to get z. This sign tells me my signs are the same. This sign tells me what they are. So you need to write down every one of these steps. Don't just write down the answer, because if you just write down the answer, you're not going to have a clue how we got that answer. So write down every step. All right, let's do one more of these and then we will be done with this video. So we're going to have 4a squared b squared minus 12ab plus 9. All right, so I'm going to make my two sets of parentheses. We know that this is a perfect square trinomial because that's a perfect square and that's a perfect square. So 4a squared b squared. Square root of 4 is 2. The square root of a squared is a. The square root of b squared is b. And then the square root of 9 is 3. This sign tells me that my signs are the same. This sign tells me what those signs are. Or you could have wrote it like this. Either way will be correct. I'll take both ways. All right, just rewind this video and watch it again if you're still unclear about how to factor these perfect squares and these trinomials in a difference of two squares.